What you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about cruise ship safety. Last month, a security officer aboard the Royal Caribbean's Majesty was reviewing routine surveillance footage when he discovered something that defied all logic. A figure moving through the ship's corridors that appeared on multiple cameras simultaneously, in locations that were physically impossible to reach within seconds of each other. But that's not the most disturbing part. When supervisors reviewed the footage, they realized this figure cast no reflection in any of the glass surfaces it passed. And its movements were so unnatural that seasoned maritime professionals refused to work night shifts after seeing it. The footage was immediately classified and locked away, but not before copies were made. Tonight, I'm sharing 11 verified accounts from cruise ship workers who encountered things that maritime law requires them to report, but company policies force them to forget. These aren't passenger complaints or urban legends. These are testimonies from trained professionals with decades of experience at sea. People whose careers depend on their credibility and attention to detail. What they witnessed in the depths of these floating cities will change how you see every cruise advertisement, every vacation brochure, and every promise of a relaxing getaway on the open ocean. Because the truth is, when you're hundreds of miles from shore with thousands of strangers, surrounded by nothing but endless water, you're not just isolated from help. You're trapped with whatever else might be aboard. Let's dive into our first story. And I promise you, this one will make you question everything you think you know about cruise ship security. Marcus had been working cruise ship security for 8 years, but nothing in his maritime training had prepared him for what he would witness aboard the Ocean Majesty during what should have been a routine Mediterranean crossing. At 28, he was considered one of the most reliable night shift officers in the fleet. Methodical, observant, and unshakable under pressure. His colleagues often joked that Marcus could spot a pickpocket 3 decks away or identify a drunk passenger before they even started stumbling. But on the night of October 15th, his keen eye for detail would become both a blessing and a curse that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The Ocean Majesty was 3 days into a 7-day cruise from Barcelona to Rome, carrying 3,200 passengers and 1,100 crew members. Marcus was stationed in the main security office on Deck 4, surrounded by dozens of monitors displaying live feeds from cameras positioned throughout the ship. The 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. shift was typically the quietest. Most passengers were asleep. The bars had closed hours ago, and only essential crew members moved through the corridors. It was during these peaceful hours that Marcus preferred to conduct his most thorough surveillance reviews, checking blind spots and ensuring all systems were functioning properly. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Marcus noticed movement on camera 47, which monitored the port side promenade on Deck 7. A figure was walking slowly along the deck, which wasn't unusual. Some passengers enjoyed late-night strolls or suffered from insomnia. But something about this person's movement pattern caught his attention. The figure moved with an odd, gliding motion, as if their feet weren't quite touching the ground. Marcus leaned closer to the monitor, adjusting the contrast to get a better view. The figure appeared to be wearing dark clothing, possibly a long coat or robe, and seemed to be of average height and build. But as Marcus watched, something impossible happened. The figure suddenly appeared on camera 52, which monitored the starboard side promenade on the same deck, a location that would require walking the entire width of the ship through multiple corridors and public areas. Marcus quickly checked the timestamp. The figure had appeared on camera 52 just 4 seconds after being visible on camera 47. That's impossible, Marcus muttered to himself, rewinding both feeds to confirm what he had seen. Even running at full speed, it would take at least 2 minutes to cross from port to starboard on deck 7. He began checking the intermediate cameras that should have captured the figure's movement between the two locations, but found nothing. No trace of the person in any of the connecting corridors, stairwells, or public areas. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he continued monitoring the feeds. At 3:22 a.m., the figure appeared on camera 31, positioned near the main pool area on deck 11, 4 decks above where it had just been seen. This time, Marcus was ready. He immediately began checking every camera that could possibly show movement between deck 7 and deck 11. The elevators, stairwells, even the crew-only service corridors. Nothing. The figure had somehow moved 4 decks vertically and appeared in a completely different section of the ship, without being detected by any of the security cameras in between. But what happened next made Marcus's blood run cold. As he watched the figure move past the pool area, he noticed something that defied all logic. The pool deck was surrounded by large glass windscreens designed to protect passengers from ocean spray. As the figure walked past these glass barriers, Marcus realized with growing horror that there was no reflection. The glass clearly reflected the pool lights, deck chairs, and even the slight movement of water in the pool. But the walking figure cast no reflection whatsoever. Marcus immediately reached for his radio to contact his supervisor, Chief Security Officer Patricia Hendricks, but hesitated. How could he explain what he was seeing? Who would believe that someone was moving through the ship like a ghost, appearing and disappearing without using any normal means of transportation? He decided to document everything first, taking screenshots and noting exact timestamps for each sighting. Over the next hour, the figure appeared on 17 different cameras throughout the ship. It was seen in the main dining hall, the casino, the theater, and even in restricted crew areas that required keycard access. Each appearance was brief, lasting no more than 30 to 40 seconds, and each time the figure moved with that same unsettling gliding motion. Most disturbing of all, Marcus began to notice that the figure seemed to be aware of the camera locations, often turning to look directly into the lens before disappearing from view. At 4:33 a.m., Marcus finally made the decision to wake Chief Hendricks. Patricia arrived in the security office within minutes, still in her pajamas, but alert and professional. Marcus showed her the screenshots and explained what he had been witnessing. Patricia's initial skepticism quickly turned to concern as she reviewed the evidence. "Show me the live feeds," she ordered, settling into the chair beside Marcus. For the next 20 minutes, they watched the monitors in tense silence. Then, at 4:55 a.m., the figure appeared on camera 18, which monitored the ship's chapel on deck 5. This time, both Marcus and Patricia witnessed something that would change their understanding of what was possible aboard their ship. The figure stood motionless in the center of the chapel for nearly 2 minutes, longer than any previous sighting. As they watched, other cameras began picking up strange anomalies. Lights flickered in corridors where no one was present. Elevator doors opened and closed on empty floors. Most unnervingly, several cameras briefly displayed what appeared to be water damage and rust on walls that Marcus knew were freshly painted and in perfect condition. "Get me the maintenance logs for this ship," Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. "I want to know everything about its history, every accident, every incident that was ever reported." As Marcus pulled up the digital records, Patricia continued watching the monitors. The figure had vanished from the chapel. But now multiple cameras were showing brief glimpses of what appeared to be the same person in different locations simultaneously. At 5:02 a.m., the figure was visible on 3 separate cameras at the same time, an impossibility that made both security officers question their own sanity. The maintenance logs revealed a disturbing pattern. The Ocean Majesty had been built in 1987, but it was constructed using materials and components salvaged from an older vessel, the Mediterranean Star, which had sunk in 1962 after a catastrophic engine room fire that killed 14 crew members. The salvaged materials included decorative elements, furniture, and even some of the ship's original security equipment. As dawn approached, the sightings became less frequent, and by 6:30 a.m., the figure had disappeared entirely. Marcus and Patricia spent the remaining 30 minutes of the shift reviewing all the recorded footage. But when they attempted to access the files, they discovered that every single recording from that night had become corrupted. The screenshots Marcus had taken were nothing but static, and the timestamp logs showed no unusual activity whatsoever. Chief Hendricks immediately contacted the ship's captain and the cruise line's corporate security division. Within hours, a team of technical specialists boarded the ship during a scheduled port stop in Naples. They spent 2 days examining every camera, every recording device, and every piece of security equipment aboard the Ocean Majesty. Their official report concluded that the incidents were the result of a cascading system malfunction caused by electromagnetic interference from a solar storm that had occurred that week. Marcus was offered a promotion to day shift supervisor, which he accepted immediately. He never worked another night shift for the remainder of his cruise ship career. Patricia Hendricks retired from Maritime Security 6 months later, citing personal reasons in her resignation letter. The Ocean Majesty underwent a complete security system overhaul during its next dry dock maintenance period. But crew members continued to report strange occurrences during night shifts. Marcus now works as a security consultant for hotels in Miami, but he still wakes up some nights in a cold sweat, remembering the way that figure moved through the ship like it owned every corridor, every deck, every shadow. He's never told anyone outside of his immediate family about what he witnessed that night. But he's never forgotten the most chilling detail of all. In those final moments before the figure disappeared from the chapel camera, it had turned to look directly into the lens, and for just a split second, Marcus could swear he saw its face clearly. It was the face of a man in his 30s, wearing a 1960s-era crew uniform, with eyes that held the unmistakable look of someone who had died in terror and never found peace. The Ocean Majesty still sails the Mediterranean today. But if you ever find yourself aboard during a night crossing, pay attention to the reflections in the glass and remember that some passengers never truly disembark. Let's move to our second story. And this one will make you question the very nature of reality aboard these floating cities. Isabella Martinez had been working as a cabin steward for 12 years. But her experience aboard the Caribbean Princess would challenge everything she thought she knew about the cruise industry. At 35, she was considered one of the most thorough and reliable housekeeping staff members in the fleet. Her supervisors praised her attention to detail and her ability to anticipate passenger needs before they were even expressed. Isabella took pride in her work, treating each stateroom as if it were her own home, ensuring every surface gleamed and every amenity was perfectly arranged. But on a seemingly routine 7-day Caribbean cruise in November, her meticulous nature would lead her to discover something that defied all logical explanation. The Caribbean Princess had departed from Fort Lauderdale on a Sunday evening, bound for stops in Cozumel, Jamaica, and Grand Cayman. Isabella was assigned to Deck 9, responsible for maintaining 32 staterooms on the port side of the ship. Her routine was always the same. Start at 8 a.m. with the early checkout rooms, work systematically down the corridor, and finish by 3 p.m. to allow time for quality control checks. She had been working this particular route for 3 years and knew every quirk of every room. From the balcony door in 9024 that required an extra push to close properly, to the shower in 9031 that had slightly lower water pressure than the others. On Tuesday morning, Isabella's third day aboard, she approached stateroom 9042 with her master keycard and cleaning supplies. According to her passenger manifest, the room was occupied by Margaret Whitmore, a 73-year-old widow from Portland, Oregon, traveling alone. Isabella had knocked on the door at 8:15 a.m. and received no response, which was typical for passengers who were either sleeping in or had already gone to breakfast. She used her key card to enter, calling out housekeeping, as she always did, but received no reply. What Isabella found inside the stateroom immediately struck her as odd. The rooms showed clear signs of occupancy. The bed was unmade, personal belongings were scattered across the dresser, and there were wet towels in the bathroom. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay on the small table by the balcony door, with a pen beside it as if someone had just stepped away. The closet contained several outfits hanging neatly, including a formal dress that appeared to be laid out for the evening's dinner service. Most telling of all, there were prescription medications on the nightstand, along with reading glasses and a romance novel with a bookmark placed about halfway through. But something felt wrong. Isabella had been cleaning passenger rooms for over a decade, and she had developed an instinct for reading the subtle signs of how people lived in these temporary spaces. The belongings in room 9042 seemed too perfectly arranged, as if they had been placed rather than naturally accumulated through normal use. The toiletries in the bathroom were positioned with mathematical precision, and the clothes in the closet hung with exactly equal spacing between each garment. Isabella completed her cleaning routine, but the nagging feeling that something was amiss stayed with her throughout the day. That evening, as she was finishing her shift, she decided to check with guest services about Mrs. Whitmore. She had worked on cruise ships long enough to know that solo elderly passengers sometimes needed extra attention, and she wanted to ensure everything was all right. "I'm checking on the guest in 9042, Isabella told Maria Santos, the evening guest services supervisor. "Margaret Whitmore. I cleaned her room today, but I haven't seen her around the ship, and I wanted to make sure she's okay." Maria pulled up the passenger database on her computer, her fingers clicking rapidly across the keyboard. After a few moments, she looked up with a puzzled expression. "I'm not showing any passenger named Margaret Whitmore in room 9042. According to our records, that room is unoccupied for this sailing." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. That's impossible. The room is clearly being used. There are personal belongings, medications, clothes in the closet. Someone is definitely staying there. Maria double-checked her records, even calling the main guest services office to verify the information. Every system showed the same result. Room 9042 was listed as unoccupied, with no passenger assigned to it for the entire 7-day cruise. There was no record of anyone named Margaret Whitmore on the ship's manifest, and no payment had been processed for that stateroom. "This has to be a system error," Maria concluded. "Sometimes passengers get moved between rooms, or there are last-minute changes that don't update properly in all our databases. I'll have someone from IT look into it tomorrow." But Isabella couldn't shake her unease. The next morning, She approached room 9042 with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Once again, she knocked and received no response. When she entered with her key card, she found the room in the same state as the previous day, clearly occupied, but with that same unsettling sense of artificial arrangement. This time, Isabella decided to examine the belongings more closely. The prescription bottles on the nightstand were for medications she recognized: heart medication, blood pressure pills, and arthritis treatment. But when she looked at the labels more carefully, her blood ran cold. The prescription dates were from 1987, and the pharmacy listed was in a town she had never heard of. The romance novel on the bedside table was a paperback edition that looked decades old, with yellowed pages and a cover design that seemed distinctly vintage. Isabella opened the closet to examine the clothing more carefully. The dresses and blouses were well maintained, but clearly from an earlier era. The cuts, fabrics, and patterns were reminiscent of styles from the 1980s. Even more disturbing, when she checked the tags, she found that several items were from department stores that she knew had gone out of business years ago. The crossword puzzle on the table was from a newspaper dated November 15th, 1987, exactly 36 years ago to the day. The pen beside it was an old-fashioned fountain pen, and the handwriting in the partially completed puzzle was in a style that Isabella's grandmother might have used, with careful, deliberate script that spoke of a different generation's approach to penmanship. Isabella's hands were shaking as she backed away from the table. She quickly finished her cleaning routine and immediately went to find her supervisor, Carmen Vega, who had been working cruise ships for 20 years and had seen everything from medical emergencies to passenger disputes. "Carmen, I need you to come look at something in room 9042, Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's something very wrong with this situation." Carmen followed Isabella to the stateroom, listening as Isabella explained about the guest services records and the vintage belongings. When they entered the room together, Carmen's expression grew increasingly serious as she examined the evidence Isabella had discovered. "I've never seen anything like this," Carmen admitted, picking up one of the prescription bottles. "These dates, this is impossible. But everything here looks so real, so lived in." Carmen immediately contacted the ship's security office and requested that Chief Security Officer David Park meet them at the stateroom. When Park arrived, he brought with him a tablet containing the ship's complete passenger manifest and room assignment records. His investigation confirmed what guest services had reported. There was no record of anyone being assigned to room 9042, no payment processed, and no passenger named Margaret Whitmore anywhere in the ship's systems. "But someone has to be staying here," Park said, examining the personal belongings. "This isn't some kind of prank or mistake. These items show real use, real wear. Someone is living in this room." Park decided to station a security camera in the corridor outside room 9042 to monitor who might be entering or leaving. He also placed a discreet motion sensor inside the room that would alert security if anyone entered when housekeeping wasn't present. For the next 2 days, Isabella continued her normal cleaning routine, but the room remained in the same state, occupied but empty, lived in but abandoned. On Friday morning, Isabella entered room 9042 for what she thought would be the last time before the cruise ended. What she found made her question her own sanity. The room was exactly as she had left it the day before, but there was one new addition. A handwritten note on the bedside table, written in the same careful script as the crossword puzzle. The note read, Thank you for taking such good care of my room, dear. I know you've been worried about me, but I'm exactly where I need to be. Some journeys never truly end, and some passengers never really disembark. The sea has been my home for longer than you might imagine. Please don't be frightened. I mean, no harm. I simply wanted to take one more cruise to feel the ocean beneath me one more time. Margaret. Isabella's scream brought security running. When Chief Park arrived, he found Isabella standing in the corridor, refusing to enter the room. The note was photographed and bagged as evidence, and the room was immediately sealed pending a full investigation. The cruise line's corporate security team boarded the ship when it returned to Fort Lauderdale. Their investigation revealed that a passenger named Margaret Whitmore had indeed sailed on the Caribbean Princess. But it was in November 1987, on the ship's maiden voyage. According to the records they eventually uncovered, Margaret had been a 73-year-old widow from Portland, Oregon, traveling alone. She had occupied room 9042 and had been reported missing on the final day of the cruise. Her body was never found, and the official report concluded that she had likely fallen overboard during the night. The personal belongings in the room were removed and stored in the ship's security office, but they vanished during the next sailing. Room 9042 was converted to crew storage, but staff members reported feeling watched whenever they entered. The room was eventually sealed permanently, with the official explanation being structural concerns. Isabella transferred to a different cruise line within a month, but she never forgot the careful handwriting in that note, or the way the room had felt both empty and occupied at the same time. She still works as a cabin steward, but she's never again encountered a passenger who wasn't there. Though sometimes, in the quiet moments between cleaning rooms, she wonders how many other guests might be sailing on journeys that never truly end. The Caribbean Princess still operates regular Caribbean cruises, but room 9042 remains sealed. Passengers sometimes report hearing faint sounds from that section of Deck 9. The rustle of pages turning, the scratch of a pen on paper, and occasionally, the soft voice of an elderly woman humming old songs from a time when the ocean was younger and the boundary between passenger and ghost was not yet so clearly defined. Our third story comes from someone who thought he understood every danger that could lurk in the waters around a cruise ship. But he was about to discover that some threats don't come from the ocean. They come from within it. Ryan Mitchell was 24 years old and working his first contract as a night lifeguard aboard the Harmony of the Seas, one of the largest cruise ships in the world. Fresh out of lifeguard certification school and eager to see the world, Ryan had jumped at the opportunity to work for Royal Caribbean. The job seemed perfect. Decent pay, travel to exotic destinations, and relatively easy work since the pools were closed to passengers after 11 p.m. His primary responsibility during the midnight to 6 a.m. shift was to ensure the pool areas remained secure and to perform routine safety checks on all the water features throughout the ship. The Harmony of the Seas boasted multiple pool areas across several decks, including the main pool complex on Deck 15, the adults-only solarium pools on Deck 11, and the exclusive suite-class pool on Deck 17. Ryan's rounds took him through each area every 2 hours, checking water temperature, chemical levels, and ensuring all safety equipment was properly positioned. It was quiet, solitary work that gave him plenty of time to think and enjoy the peaceful atmosphere of the ship at night. Ryan had been working the route for 3 weeks without incident, when something happened that would forever change his relationship with water. It was a Tuesday night in the middle of a 7-day Western Caribbean cruise, and the ship was sailing through calm seas between Cozumel and Jamaica. At approximately 2:15 a.m., Ryan was conducting his routine check of the main pool area when he noticed ripples on the surface of the largest pool. This wasn't unusual in itself. The ship's movement could sometimes create small waves in the pools, and the filtration system occasionally caused minor surface disturbances. But these ripples were different. They moved in a deliberate pattern, creating concentric circles that seemed to originate from the deep end of the pool, as if something large was moving beneath the surface. Ryan approached the pool edge and peered into the chlorinated water. The underwater lights cast an eerie blue glow throughout the pool, illuminating every tile on the bottom. The water was crystal clear. He could see all the way to the drain covers at the deepest point. There was nothing there. No debris, no equipment malfunction, nothing that could explain the ripples he had just witnessed. He checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. Ryan made a note in his logbook about the unusual water movement and continued his rounds. But as he walked toward the hot tubs to check their temperature settings, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of someone swimming. The rhythmic splash of arms cutting through water, the steady kick of legs propelling a body forward, the occasional gasp of breath between strokes. Ryan spun around to face the main pool. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the deck lights like a mirror. But the swimming sounds continued, growing stronger and more distinct. He could hear the swimmers' breathing becoming labored, as if they were pushing themselves through an intense workout. The splashing grew more frantic, more desperate, as if the person was struggling to stay afloat. "Hello," Ryan called out, his voice echoing across the empty deck. "Pool area is closed. You need to exit the water immediately." The swimming sounds stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was so complete that Ryan could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He grabbed his flashlight and swept the beam across the entire pool area, checking every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding spot. The deck was completely empty. Ryan's training kicked in. He immediately contacted the ship's security office via his radio. "Security, this is Pool Watch. I need someone to respond to the main pool area on Deck 15. Possible unauthorized swimming activity." Security Officer Lisa Chen arrived within 5 minutes, accompanied by her partner, Officer David Kim. Ryan explained what he had heard, and together they conducted a thorough search of the entire pool complex. They checked the changing rooms, the equipment storage areas, even the maintenance spaces beneath the pool deck. They found no evidence of any unauthorized person in the area. "Could have been sounds carrying from another part of the ship," Officer Chen suggested. "Sometimes the acoustics on these vessels can be tricky, especially at night when it's quiet." Ryan nodded, but he wasn't convinced. He had been working around pools for 6 years, first as a community pool lifeguard and then at various resort properties. He knew the sound of swimming when he heard it, and what he had experienced was definitely someone moving through water, not echoes or acoustic tricks. The security officers completed their report and left, but Ryan remained unsettled. He decided to stay closer to the main pool area for the remainder of his shift, conducting more frequent checks than usual. At 3:45 a.m., it happened again. This time, Ryan was sitting at the lifeguard station when the sounds began. The swimming was more intense than before, with powerful strokes that suggested someone in excellent physical condition. But what made this occurrence even more disturbing was that Ryan could now hear the swimmers breathing clearly. Deep, rhythmic inhalations and exhalations that spoke of someone engaged in serious athletic training. Ryan stood up slowly, trying not to make any noise that might scare away whoever was in the pool. He moved carefully toward the water's edge, his flashlight ready, but not yet turned on. The swimming sounds were coming from the far end of the pool, near the diving area. As he got closer, he could hear water lapping against the pool edges, as if displaced by a moving body. When Ryan reached the pool's edge and looked down, his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The water was moving in patterns consistent with someone swimming laps. Waves washing against the sides, small whirlpools forming where arms and legs would be cutting through the water. But there was no one there. The pool was empty, yet the water moved as if occupied by an invisible swimmer. Ryan turned on his flashlight and aimed it at the water. The beam revealed something that made him question his own sanity. There were air bubbles rising to the surface in a steady stream, following a path that traced the length of the pool. The bubbles appeared to be coming from someone swimming underwater, but there was no body creating them. As Ryan watched in horrified fascination, the bubble trail reached the shallow end of the pool and stopped. The water became still for a moment, then suddenly erupted in a splash pattern consistent with someone surfacing for air. Ryan could even hear the gasp of breath, but there was nothing visible breaking the surface. "This is impossible," Ryan whispered to himself, backing away from the pool edge. But as he retreated, he heard something that made his blood freeze. The sound of wet footsteps on the pool deck, moving away from the water toward the changing rooms. Ryan followed the sound, his flashlight beam dancing across the deck as he searched for any sign of the invisible presence. The wet footprints were there, clear impressions of bare feet leading from the pool to the men's changing room. Each print was perfectly formed, showing the outline of toes and the arch of a foot. But they appeared and disappeared, as if being made by someone who existed only partially in the physical world. Ryan's radio crackled to life. "Pool watch, this is security. We're getting reports of unusual sounds from the pool area. Everything okay up there?" Ryan hesitated before responding. How could he explain what he was witnessing? "Security, I need you to come back to Deck 15. I'm not sure how to describe what's happening here." This time, Security Chief Martinez responded personally, bringing with him 2 additional officers and a maintenance supervisor. Ryan led them through everything he had observed, pointing out the wet footprints that were still visible on the deck. Chief Martinez examined the prints carefully, taking photographs and measurements. "These are definitely human footprints," Martinez confirmed. "But I don't understand how someone could have gotten in and out of this area without being detected. We have cameras covering all the access points." The maintenance supervisor, Carlos Ruiz, had been working on cruise ships for 15 years. He examined the pool's filtration and circulation systems, looking for any mechanical explanation for the unusual water movement. "Everything's functioning normally," he reported. "Water temperature, chemical levels, circulation pumps, all within normal parameters." Chief Martinez made the decision to drain the main pool for a complete inspection. "If someone is somehow getting into this area undetected, we need to find out how. This is a serious security concern." The pool was drained over the next 4 hours, but the inspection revealed nothing unusual. The pool structure was sound, the filtration system was working perfectly, and there were no hidden access points or equipment malfunctions that could explain the phenomena Ryan had witnessed. But as the maintenance crew began refilling the pool the following evening, Ryan made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. While reviewing the ship's historical records in the crew library, he found a newspaper clipping from 1998 that made his hands shake as he read it. The article described a tragic incident aboard the Harmony of the Sea's predecessor vessel, which had operated the same Caribbean route. A 26-year-old competitive swimmer named Michael Torres had been found drowned in the ship's main pool during a night crossing between Cozumel and Jamaica. According to the report, Torres had apparently entered the pool area after hours for a late-night training session. Security cameras had captured him entering the pool area at 2:15 a.m., but he was never seen leaving. His body was discovered the next morning by the day shift lifeguard. The most chilling detail in the article was the coroner's finding. Torres had drowned despite being an Olympic-level swimmer with no history of medical conditions that would have impaired his swimming ability. The official cause of death was listed as unexplained drowning, and the incident had led to enhanced security measures for all pool areas on cruise ships. Ryan realized that the times matched exactly. 2:15 a.m. was when he had first heard the swimming sounds. The route was the same, the location was the same, even the date was the same. 27 years to the day after Michael Torres had died. Ryan requested an immediate transfer to day shift, citing personal reasons. His supervisor, who had heard about the unusual incidents from Security Chief Martinez, approved the transfer without question. Ryan never worked another night shift on a cruise ship, and he left the maritime industry entirely 6 months later. The Harmony of the Seas continues to operate Caribbean cruises, and the main pool remains open to passengers during regular hours. But night shift lifeguards are now assigned in pairs, and the pool area is equipped with motion sensors that alert security to any movement after hours. Despite these precautions, crew members occasionally report hearing swimming sounds from the main pool during night crossings between Cozumel and Jamaica. Ryan now works as a swimming instructor at a community center in his hometown of Phoenix, Arizona, as far from the ocean as he can manage. But sometimes, in the quiet moments after the pool closes for the night, he still hears the echo of those desperate strokes cutting through water. And he remembers the wet footprints that led nowhere. Made by a swimmer who would never stop training, never stop trying to reach a finish line that existed somewhere between the world of the living and the depths of the sea. The pool deck of the Harmony of the Seas is cleaned and dried every night after the final maintenance check. But crew members have learned not to look too closely at the deck on certain nights, especially when sailing between Cozumel and Jamaica. Because sometimes, in the early morning hours, wet footprints still appear on the pristine deck. The eternal evidence of a swimmer who refuses to accept that his final race has already ended. Our fourth story takes us into the heart of every cruise ship, the main dining hall, where thousands of passengers gather each day to share meals and create memories. But what happens in these grand spaces after the last guest has left and the lights go dim is something that will make you reconsider every late-night snack you've ever craved. Antonio Vasquez was 42 years old and had been working as a night janitor aboard cruise ships for 8 years. A single father from Honduras, he had taken the job to support his 2 daughters back home, sending most of his earnings to ensure they could attend good schools and have opportunities he never had. Antonio was known among the crew for his strong work ethic and reliability. He never missed a shift, never complained about the long hours, and took pride in maintaining the pristine condition that passengers expected when they entered the dining areas each morning. The Royal Majesty was a mid-sized cruise ship operating 7-day Mediterranean routes, and Antonio was responsible for the overnight cleaning of the main dining hall, a massive space that could accommodate over 1,200 passengers across 2 levels. The dining hall was elegant, with crystal chandeliers, marble columns, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning ocean views during daylight hours. But at night, when Antonio worked alone with only emergency lighting to guide him, the space took on a completely different character. Antonio's routine was methodical and efficient. He would begin at 1:30 a.m., after the last of the late-night room service orders had been completed and the kitchen staff had finished their final cleaning. He would start with the upper level, working his way systematically through each section, wiping down tables, sanitizing chairs, mopping floors, and ensuring every surface was spotless for the breakfast service that would begin at 6 a.m. The work was solitary but peaceful, and Antonio had grown to appreciate the quiet dignity of maintaining these spaces where people gathered to celebrate special occasions and create lasting memories. It was during his 4th week aboard the Royal Majesty that Antonio first heard the sounds that would change his understanding of what lingered in the ship's grand spaces after dark. He was cleaning the upper level of the dining hall, working near the starboard windows, when he heard the unmistakable clink of silverware against china. The sound was faint but distinct, the gentle percussion of a formal dinner service in progress. Antonio paused in his work and listened carefully. The sounds were coming from the lower level of the dining hall, which he had not yet begun cleaning. He could hear the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional laugh, and the subtle sounds of people enjoying a meal together. This wasn't entirely unusual. Sometimes crew members would gather in public spaces during their off hours, and it was possible that some of the kitchen staff were having a late meal after their shift. But as Antonio listened more carefully, something about the sounds troubled him. The conversation was too formal, too refined for casual crew interaction. He could hear the gentle clink of wine glasses, the rustle of cloth napkins, and what sounded like a string quartet playing softly in the background. These were the sounds of an elegant dinner party, not a casual crew gathering. Antonio made his way to the staircase that connected the 2 levels of the dining hall. As he descended, the sounds grew clearer and more distinct. He could now make out individual voices. A woman laughing at something amusing, a man commenting on the quality of the wine, another voice asking for the salt to be passed. The conversation was in English, but with accents and speech patterns that seemed distinctly old-fashioned, as if the speakers were from a different era. When Antonio reached the bottom of the stairs, he found himself looking out over the lower dining level. The space was completely dark except for the emergency lighting along the walls. Every table was empty. Every chair was pushed in precisely as he had left them the night before. But the sounds continued, now so clear and detailed that Antonio could almost see the diners who were creating them. He could hear the scrape of chairs being moved, the gentle thud of serving dishes being placed on tables, and the soft footsteps of waiters moving between tables. Most unnervingly, he could hear the sounds of eating, the careful cutting of meat, the gentle slurp of soup being consumed, the satisfied sighs of people enjoying a well-prepared meal. Antonio reached for his flashlight and swept the beam across the dining area. The light revealed empty tables set with pristine white tablecloths, gleaming silverware, and crystal glasses that caught and reflected the beam. But as the light moved across the space, the sounds of dining continued unabated, as if the diners were completely unaffected by his presence. "Hello," Antonio called out in English, then repeated the greeting in Spanish. "Is someone here? The dining room is closed." The conversation paused for a moment, as if the invisible diners had heard him and were considering how to respond. Then, to Antonio's amazement, a woman's voice answered him directly. "Good evening," the voice said, with a refined accent that Antonio couldn't quite place. "Please don't be alarmed. We're just finishing our dinner. We'll be gone shortly." Antonio's hands were shaking as he swept his flashlight beam toward the source of the voice. The light revealed nothing but empty space, but he could hear the woman clearly, as if she were standing just a few feet away from him. I don't understand," Antonio stammered. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "We've been dining here for many years," a man's voice replied, this one with a slight British accent. "This is our table, number 47 by the window. We always request the same table when we sail." Antonio looked toward the area where the voices seemed to be coming from. Table 47 was indeed by the windows, set for 8 people with the same pristine place settings as every other table in the room. But as he watched, he saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the wine glasses at the table was slowly tilting, as if being lifted by invisible hands. The glass rose several inches into the air, paused as if someone were taking a sip, then gently returned to its place on the table. "This is impossible," Antonio whispered, backing toward the stairs. "Nothing is impossible at sea," the woman's voice replied gently. "The ocean remembers everything. Every ship that has sailed these waters, every passenger who has dined in rooms like this one. We're simply continuing our journey, enjoying the same pleasures we've always enjoyed." As if to emphasize her point, Antonio heard the sound of a champagne cork being popped, followed by the fizz of champagne being poured into glasses. He could see bubbles forming in several glasses on table 47, as if the invisible liquid were being distributed among the unseen diners. Antonio's radio crackled to life. "Night crew, this is security. We're getting reports of unusual sounds from the main dining hall. Everything okay down there?" Antonio fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking so badly he could barely press the talk button. "Security, this is Antonio in the main dining hall. I need someone to come down here. There's something happening that I can't explain." "On our way," came the reply. The invisible diners seemed to sense that their privacy was about to be interrupted. Antonio heard chairs being pushed back from tables, napkins being folded, and the general sounds of people preparing to leave a restaurant. "It's time for us to go," the woman's voice said, now seeming to come from closer to Antonio's position. "Thank you for not being frightened of us. Most people are, you know." "Wait," Antonio called out. "Who are you? What ship are you from?" "The Britannia," the man's voice replied, now sounding more distant. "We sailed from Southampton in 1952. Such a lovely crossing it was, until the storm." Antonio felt a chill run through him. He knew maritime history well enough to recognize the reference. The Britannia had been a luxury liner that sank in the North Atlantic in 1952 during a severe storm. Over 400 passengers and crew had been lost, including many who had been dining in the ship's grand ballroom when the vessel went down. By the time security officers Rodriguez and Chen arrived, the dining hall had returned to complete silence. Antonio led them through the space, pointing out table 47 and explaining what he had experienced. The officers found evidence that supported Antonio's account. Several wine glasses contained what appeared to be champagne residue, despite the fact that no alcohol service had taken place in the dining hall for over 8 hours. "Could be condensation," Officer Rodriguez suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. The glasses were positioned in a pattern consistent with a formal dinner service, and the residue had the distinct aroma of expensive champagne. Security Chief Williams arrived shortly after, bringing with him the ship's hotel director and the food and beverage manager. They conducted a thorough investigation of the dining hall, checking all access points and reviewing security camera footage. The cameras showed Antonio entering the dining hall alone at 1:30 a.m. and working normally until approximately 2:15 a.m., when he could be seen stopping his work and appearing to listen to something. The footage clearly showed him moving toward the lower level and having what appeared to be a conversation with empty space. Most disturbing of all, the audio pickup from the security cameras had recorded faint sounds during the time period Antonio described. Sounds that were consistent with a dinner service in progress, including voices speaking in refined accents and the clink of silverware and glassware. The ship's historian, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, was consulted about the Britannia reference. Her research revealed that the Royal Majesty had been built using materials salvaged from several older vessels, including decorative elements and furniture from ships that had operated in the North Atlantic during the 1950s. Some of these materials had indeed come from vessels associated with the same shipping line that had operated the Britannia. It's possible that objects can retain memories of the people who used them, Dr. Mitchell explained to the senior staff. In maritime folklore, there are countless stories of ships carrying the spirits of passengers from previous vessels, especially when materials are reused in new construction. Antonio was offered a transfer to day shift maintenance, which he accepted immediately. He never worked alone in the main dining hall again, but other night shift workers began reporting similar experiences. The sounds of elegant dinner parties could be heard on certain nights, always between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., and always centered around table 47. The cruise line's response was to quietly remove table 47 from service, replacing it with a decorative plant display. But crew members continued to report the sounds of dining, and passengers occasionally mentioned hearing lovely dinner music coming from the main dining hall during late-night walks on the promenade deck. Antonio completed his contract aboard the Royal Majesty, but never returned to cruise ship work. He now operates a small restaurant in his hometown in Honduras, serving traditional meals to local families. But sometimes, during the quiet moments after closing time, when he's cleaning tables and preparing for the next day's service, he remembers the refined voices of the Britannia's passengers and wonders if somewhere in the vast expanse of the ocean, elegant dinner parties continue in dining rooms that exist only in memory and moonlight. The Royal Majesty still operates Mediterranean cruises, and the main dining hall continues to serve thousands of passengers each week. But the night cleaning staff now work in pairs, and table 47 remains permanently out of service, because some dinner parties, it seems, are meant to last forever, and some passengers never truly finish their final meal. They simply continue dining in the spaces between what was and what is, sharing eternal conversations over wine that never empties and courses that never end. Our fifth story will take you into the mechanical heart of these floating cities, where the very infrastructure that keeps passengers moving safely between decks can become a gateway to something far more sinister than anyone could imagine. Derek Sullivan was 31 years old and had been working as a maintenance engineer aboard cruise ships for 7 years. Specializing in elevator systems, Derek was responsible for ensuring that the dozens of passenger and service elevators aboard the Ocean Paradise operated smoothly and safely. His expertise was crucial. With over 4,000 passengers and crew members relying on the ship's vertical transportation systems daily, any malfunction could create serious safety hazards and passenger complaints. The Ocean Paradise was a massive vessel with 18 passenger decks and multiple elevator banks serving different sections of the ship. Derek's daily routine involved inspecting each elevator system, checking mechanical components, reviewing computer diagnostics, and responding to any service calls from passengers or crew. He took pride in maintaining a perfect safety record and had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve through methodical troubleshooting and mechanical expertise. It was during a routine Atlantic crossing from Miami to Barcelona that Derek first encountered the elevator that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the ship's construction. The trouble began on a Wednesday morning when the guest services desk started receiving complaints about elevator bank C, located midships on the starboard side. Passengers reported that the elevator was stopping at floors that didn't exist and displaying deck numbers that weren't part of the ship's layout. Elevator C3 keeps stopping at deck 13, complained Mrs. Henderson, a frequent cruiser who knew ship layouts well. But this ship doesn't have a deck 13. It goes from deck 12 directly to deck 14, like most ships do for superstitious reasons. Derek initially dismissed the complaints as passenger confusion or a simple display malfunction. Many cruise ships did skip deck 13 in their numbering system, going directly from 12 to 14, to avoid the superstitions associated with the number 13. He assumed the elevator's floor indicator was malfunctioning and displaying incorrect numbers. But when Derek arrived at elevator bank C to investigate, he discovered something that made no sense from an engineering perspective. Elevator C3 was indeed stopping at what appeared to be deck 13. And when the doors opened, they revealed a corridor that Derek had never seen before in his 7 years of working on the Ocean Paradise. The corridor beyond the elevator doors was dimly lit and appeared to be flooded with about 6 inches of dark water. The walls were covered in rust stains and what looked like seaweed, and the air that wafted into the elevator carried the unmistakable smell of salt water and decay. Most disturbing of all, the architectural style of the corridor was completely different from the rest of the ship. It featured older fixtures, different carpeting patterns, and wall panels that looked like they belonged to a vessel from decades past. Derek stepped cautiously into the flooded corridor, his waterproof work boots splashing through the ankle-deep water. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with stateroom doors that bore room numbers in a font and style that predated the Ocean Paradise's construction. The doors were numbered in the 1300 series: 1301, 1302, 1303. Continuing the sequence that should have been impossible on a ship that officially had no deck 13. As Derek moved down the corridor, he noticed that the water seemed to be flowing, as if there were a current running through the hallway. The movement was subtle but consistent, and occasionally he could see small pieces of debris floating past, bits of seaweed, fragments of wood, and other materials that had no business being inside a cruise ship. Derek tried his radio to contact the engineering office, but received only static. The ship's internal communication system seemed unable to penetrate whatever space he had entered. He decided to explore further, hoping to understand how this impossible deck could exist within the ship's known structure. The stateroom doors along the corridor were all slightly ajar, and through the gaps, Derek could see that the rooms beyond were also flooded. But these weren't the modern staterooms of the Ocean Paradise. They were smaller, more cramped quarters with porthole windows instead of the large balcony doors that characterized the current ship's design. The furniture was older, the color schemes were different, and everything had the waterlogged appearance of a vessel that had been submerged for years. At the end of the corridor, Derek found a stairwell that led both up and down to other levels. The stairs were made of metal grating that was heavily corroded, and the water flowing down the steps created a constant dripping sound that echoed through the space. Against his better judgment, Derek decided to explore the lower level. The deck below was even more disturbing. The flooding was deeper here, reaching nearly to Derek's knees, and the water was murky and filled with floating debris. The corridor was lined with what appeared to be crew quarters. Small, utilitarian rooms that were completely unlike the modern crew accommodations aboard the Ocean Paradise. Through the open doors, Derek could see bunk beds, lockers, and personal belongings that looked like they had been abandoned in haste. But it was the personal items that made Derek's blood run cold. On a waterlogged desk in one of the crew quarters, he found a ship's manifest dated 1962, listing crew members for a vessel called the Mediterranean Star. The manifest was written in multiple languages and bore the official seal of a shipping company that Derek recognized from maritime history. A company that had gone out of business in the 1960s after losing several ships to accidents and storms. Derek photographed the manifest with his waterproof work phone, but when he tried to review the images, he found that they showed only static and distortion. The camera seemed unable to capture clear images of anything in this impossible space. As Derek continued exploring, he began to hear sounds that made him question his own sanity. From somewhere deeper in the flooded corridors came the sounds of people moving through water, splashing footsteps, voices calling out in distress, and the creaking of metal under stress. The sounds grew closer, and Derek realized that he was not alone in this submerged deck. Derek quickly made his way back to the stairwell and climbed toward what he hoped was the elevator. But when he reached the level where he had entered, he found himself in a corridor that looked different from the one he had originally explored. The room numbers were different, the water level had changed, and the elevator doors were nowhere to be seen. Panic began to set in as Derek realized he might be trapped in this impossible space. He tried every door along the corridor, looking for another way out. But each room he entered seemed to lead to more flooded spaces, more abandoned quarters, and more evidence of a ship that had met a tragic end decades ago. It was only when Derek heard the familiar ding of an elevator arriving that he was able to find his way back to elevator C-3. The doors opened to reveal the normal, dry interior of the Ocean Paradise's elevator system. Derek stepped inside quickly, pressing the button for Deck 5, where the engineering office was located. But as the elevator began to move, Derek looked at the floor indicator and saw something that made his hands shake. The displays showed that they were ascending from Deck 13, passing through floors that officially didn't exist, before finally reaching the familiar numbered decks of the Ocean Paradise. Derek immediately reported his experience to Chief Engineer Martinez, providing detailed descriptions of what he had encountered. Martinez was skeptical until Derek showed him the water damage on his work boots and the salt stains on his uniform, evidence that he had indeed been walking through flooded spaces. A full investigation was launched, involving the ship's senior officers and representatives from the cruise line's corporate engineering division. The investigation revealed that the Ocean Paradise had been constructed using materials and components salvaged from several older vessels, including significant structural elements from the Mediterranean Star, which had sunk in the North Atlantic in 1962 after suffering catastrophic flooding during a severe storm. The salvaged materials had been integrated into the Ocean Paradise's design to reduce construction costs. But the engineering team had never fully documented which components came from which vessels. It appeared that entire sections of the Mediterranean Star's interior structure had been incorporated into the new ship, creating spaces that existed in a kind of temporal overlap between the two vessels. Elevator C3 was immediately taken out of service, and the entire elevator bank was sealed pending further investigation. But other maintenance workers began reporting similar experiences with different elevator systems throughout the ship. Some elevators would occasionally stop at floors that didn't appear on any deck plans, revealing corridors that belonged to ships that had sailed decades earlier. Derek requested a transfer to a different vessel, citing irreconcilable technical concerns with the Ocean Paradise's elevator systems. He now works for a major hotel chain, maintaining elevator systems in buildings that are firmly anchored to solid ground. But he still has nightmares about the flooded corridors and the sounds of people moving through dark water, searching for an escape that would never come. The Ocean Paradise continues to operate transatlantic cruises, but Elevator Bank C remains permanently out of service. Passengers occasionally report hearing water dripping behind the sealed elevator doors, and maintenance workers have learned to avoid working alone in the elevator shafts during night shifts. Because some ships, it seems, never truly sink. They simply continue sailing in the spaces between what was and what is, carrying passengers and crew who are still trying to reach destinations that exist only in the memory of steel and the echo of voices calling out from decks that were never meant to be found. The elevator shaft of the Ocean Paradise extends deeper than any blueprint shows, reaching down into spaces where time flows like water and the past refuses to stay submerged. And sometimes, late at night, when the ship is crossing the same waters where the Mediterranean star met its fate, passengers report that the sealed elevator doors open briefly, revealing glimpses of corridors that smell of salt water and echo with the voices of those who are still trying to find their way home. Our sixth story comes from the bridge of a cruise ship, where the chain of command is absolute and the captain's word is law. But what happens when that authority becomes divided against itself in ways that defy all logic and maritime protocol? Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen was 29 years old and serving as second officer aboard the Majestic Voyager, a luxury cruise ship operating 14-day transatlantic crossings between New York and Southampton. With 8 years of maritime experience and a spotless service record, Sarah was being groomed for promotion to first officer and eventually command of her own vessel. She was known for her sharp attention to detail, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her unwavering respect for proper chain of command protocols. The Majestic Voyager was under the command of Captain Robert Hartwell, a veteran mariner with 32 years of experience and an impeccable reputation throughout the cruise industry. Captain Hartwell was respected by both crew and passengers for his professionalism, his encyclopedic knowledge of maritime law, and his ability to handle any emergency with decisive leadership. Sarah had served under Captain Hartwell for 18 months and considered him an ideal mentor for her own command aspirations. It was during the ship's 6th day at sea, while crossing the mid-Atlantic in rough weather, that Sarah first noticed something that would shatter her understanding of reality aboard the Majestic Voyager. The ship was experiencing moderate swells and gusty winds, requiring constant attention to course corrections and passenger safety announcements. Sarah was on duty at the bridge during the 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. watch, when she received contradictory orders that made no sense from a command perspective. At 5:15 p.m., Captain Hartwell appeared on the bridge and ordered a course correction to 285 degrees to avoid a weather system approaching from the northwest. Sarah acknowledged the order and instructed the helmsman to adjust course accordingly. The captain remained on the bridge for approximately 10 minutes, reviewing weather reports and discussing passenger safety protocols with the duty officers. But at 5:30 p.m., just 15 minutes later, Captain Hartwell again appeared on the bridge and countermanded his previous order, instructing Sarah to return to the original heading of 295 degrees. When Sarah questioned the change, pointing out that they had just altered course to avoid the weather system, the captain looked at her with confusion. "I haven't given any course corrections in the past hour, Lieutenant Commander," Captain Hartwell said firmly. "We've been maintaining our original heading throughout this watch." Sarah felt a chill of confusion and concern. She had clearly received orders from Captain Hartwell just minutes earlier, and the helmsman had acknowledged the same orders. But the captain standing before her now seemed to have no memory of the previous interaction. "Sir, with respect, you were on the bridge 15 minutes ago," Sarah replied carefully. "You ordered a course correction to 285 degrees to avoid the weather system." Captain Hartwell's expression grew stern. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, I've been in my quarters reviewing passenger manifests for the past hour. I came to the bridge just now to check on our progress. Are you suggesting that I don't remember my own actions?" The helmsman, Petty Officer Rodriguez, looked uncomfortable as he glanced between Sarah and the captain. Sarah realized that she was in an impossible situation. Either she was experiencing some kind of mental breakdown, or something inexplicable was happening aboard the ship. "My apologies, Captain," Sarah said, deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. "Perhaps I misunderstood the earlier communications." Captain Hartwell accepted her explanation, but Sarah could see concern in his eyes. After reviewing the ship's status and confirming their course, the captain left the bridge, reminding Sarah to contact him immediately if weather conditions deteriorated. Sarah was deeply troubled by the incident, but she tried to rationalize it as stress or fatigue affecting her perception. However, 20 minutes later, at 5:50 p.m., she witnessed something that made rationalization impossible. Through the bridge windows, Sarah could see Captain Hartwell on the port side wing bridge, using binoculars to observe the weather conditions ahead. At the same time, she could hear Captain Hartwell's voice over the ship's internal communication system, making an announcement to passengers about the rough weather and safety precautions. The announcement was clearly live, not a recording, as the captain was responding to questions from the guest services office in real time. Sarah looked back toward the wing bridge and confirmed that Captain Hartwell was still there, focused on his weather observations. But the voice over the communication system continued, discussing specific passenger concerns and giving detailed instructions to department heads throughout the ship. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered to herself, checking the communication system to see where the captain's voice was originating. According to the system display, Captain Hartwell was broadcasting from his quarters on Deck 2. But Sarah could clearly see him on the wing bridge just 50 feet away. Sarah grabbed her binoculars and focused on the figure on the wing bridge. It was definitely Captain Hartwell. She could see his distinctive profile, his captain's uniform, and even the small scar on his left hand that he had gotten during a sailing accident years earlier. But the voice over the communication system was also definitely Captain Hartwell. With the same speech patterns, the same authoritative tone, and the same detailed knowledge of ship operations that only the real captain would possess. As Sarah watched in growing alarm, the captain on the wing bridge lowered his binoculars and turned toward the bridge windows. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass, and Captain Hartwell raised his hand in a casual wave. Sarah waved back automatically, but her blood ran cold when she realized that the captain's voice was still coming over the communication system at that exact moment, engaged in a detailed discussion about dinner service arrangements. Sarah immediately contacted the ship's security chief, Commander Patricia Walsh, requesting an urgent meeting. When Commander Walsh arrived on the bridge, Sarah explained what she had witnessed, trying to keep her voice steady and professional. "I need you to verify Captain Hartwell's current location," Sarah said. "I believe there may be a security situation involving someone impersonating the captain." Commander Walsh took the request seriously, immediately dispatching security officers to check the captain's quarters, the communications center, and all other areas where the captain might be located. The results of the search were disturbing and inexplicable. Security found Captain Hartwell in his quarters, unconscious at his desk, with no apparent cause for his condition. The ship's medical officer, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, was called to examine the captain and found him to be in a deep, unresponsive state similar to a coma, but with normal vital signs and no indication of injury or illness. But even as Dr. Morrison was examining the unconscious captain in his quarters, his voice continued to come over the ship's communication system, now giving orders to the engineering department about power management during the rough weather. The voice was so clear and authoritative that crew members throughout the ship were following the orders without question. Commander Walsh immediately ordered a complete lockdown of the ship's communication systems and began a systematic search for whoever was impersonating the captain. But the search revealed something that defied all logical explanation. Security cameras throughout the ship showed Captain Hartwell in multiple locations simultaneously. The cameras captured him on the bridge, giving orders to the navigation team, in the engine room consulting with the chief engineer, in the dining hall speaking with the food service manager, and in the medical bay, discussing passenger health concerns with Dr. Morrison. All of these activities were happening at the same time. And in each location, the figure appeared to be the genuine Captain Hartwell, complete with his mannerisms, his knowledge of ship operations, and his distinctive way of speaking. Most disturbing of all, when Commander Walsh reviewed the security footage more carefully, she noticed that in several shots, the captain figure cast no shadow, and in others, he appeared to be slightly translucent, as if he were not entirely solid. Dr. Morrison's examination of the unconscious captain revealed something that made the situation even more mysterious. Captain Hartwell's brain activity showed patterns consistent with someone who was actively engaged in complex decision-making and communication. Despite his unresponsive physical state, it was as if his consciousness was operating independently of his body, somehow projecting itself throughout the ship to fulfill his command responsibilities. The crisis deepened when the ship encountered a genuine emergency. A passenger in stateroom 7042 suffered a heart attack, requiring immediate medical attention and coordination with Coast Guard services for potential helicopter evacuation. The response to this emergency revealed the full extent of the supernatural situation aboard the majestic Voyager. Captain Hartwell appeared simultaneously in the medical bay to coordinate the patient's care, on the bridge to manage the ship's positioning for the helicopter approach, in the communications center to coordinate with Coast Guard services, and in the passenger areas to manage crowd control and maintain calm among the other guests. Each manifestation of the captain demonstrated complete knowledge of the situation and gave appropriate, coordinated orders that worked together seamlessly to handle the emergency. The passenger's life was saved, and the helicopter evacuation was executed flawlessly. But the crew was left with the terrifying realization that their ship was being commanded by multiple versions of their captain, while the real Captain Hartwell remained unconscious in his quarters. The situation continued for 6 more hours, with the captain's consciousness apparently operating throughout the ship while his body remained unresponsive. It was only when the ship entered calmer waters and the immediate crisis had passed that Captain Hartwell suddenly awakened in his quarters, with no memory of the events that had transpired. When briefed on what had happened, Captain Hartwell was as baffled as everyone else. He remembered going to his quarters to review passenger manifests, but had no recollection of the multiple appearances throughout the ship or the emergency response coordination. The incident was reported to the cruise line's corporate headquarters, but the official response was to classify the event as a medical episode involving the captain's temporary incapacitation, with no mention of the supernatural manifestations witnessed by dozens of crew members. Sarah requested a transfer to a different vessel, citing irreconcilable concerns about command structure integrity. She now serves as first officer aboard a container ship, where the chain of command is simple and the captain can only be in one place at a time. Captain Hartwell completed his contract aboard the Majestic Voyager, but retired from cruise ship command 6 months later. He now teaches maritime law at a naval academy, but he's never been able to explain the 6 hours of his life that he can't remember, or the detailed reports of his actions during a time when he was unconscious. The Majestic Voyager continues to operate transatlantic crossings, but crew members have learned to verify the captain's physical location before following orders, especially during rough weather or emergency situations. Because sometimes, it seems, the responsibility of command can transcend the limitations of a single physical form, and a captain's duty to his ship and passengers can manifest in ways that defy the laws of physics and challenge everything we think we know about the nature of leadership and consciousness at sea. The bridge of the Majestic Voyager now has additional security protocols and monitoring systems, but experienced officers know that some mysteries of command cannot be solved by technology or procedure. They can only be accepted as part of the strange reality of life at sea, where the boundary between duty and the supernatural sometimes blurs in ways that ensure the safety of all aboard, regardless of the cost to those who bear the ultimate responsibility for every soul on the ship. Our 7th story takes us into the private sanctuaries where passengers retreat from the public spaces of the ship, only to discover that some reflections show far more than they should, revealing truths that were meant to stay hidden beneath the waves. Patricia Gonzalez was 38 years old and had been working as a housekeeping supervisor aboard cruise ships for 12 years. Her expertise in managing guest accommodations and resolving unusual passenger complaints had earned her a reputation as one of the most capable supervisors in the fleet. Patricia was responsible for overseeing the housekeeping staff on decks 10 through 12 of the Emerald Seas, ensuring that every stateroom met the exacting standards expected by the ship's affluent clientele. The Emerald Seas was a luxury vessel catering to discerning travelers, featuring spacious suites with premium amenities and personalized service. Patricia took particular pride in maintaining the ship's most exclusive accommodations, including the premium suite collection on Deck 12, where rooms commanded premium prices and attracted repeat customers who expected perfection in every detail. It was during a 10-day Mediterranean cruise that Patricia first encountered the mirror in Suite 1205 that would challenge her understanding of what reflections could reveal. The trouble began when Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, a wealthy widow from Boston who had sailed with the cruise line for over 15 years, contacted guest services with an unusual complaint. "There's something wrong with the mirror in my suite," Mrs. Whitfield reported to the guest services desk. "It's not showing my reflection correctly. I look into it and see other people. People I recognize, but who shouldn't be there." Patricia initially assumed this was a case of poor lighting or a distorted mirror surface, issues that occasionally occurred with the large vanity mirrors in the luxury suites. She personally visited Suite 1205 to investigate, bringing with her a maintenance technician to examine the mirror's mounting and lighting system. Suite 1205 was one of the ship's most elegant accommodations, featuring a spacious bedroom, separate sitting area, and a luxurious bathroom with a large vanity mirror that dominated one wall. The mirror was approximately 6 feet wide and 4 feet tall, framed in ornate gold-leafed molding that complemented the suite's classical decor. When Patricia looked into the mirror, she initially saw nothing unusual, just her own reflection and that of the maintenance technician, along with the suite's furnishings reflected normally. But as she adjusted the lighting and examined the mirror's surface more closely, she began to notice subtle anomalies that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The reflection seemed to have a slight delay, as if the image were being transmitted from somewhere else, rather than being a direct reflection. More disturbing, Patricia occasionally caught glimpses of movement in the reflected room that didn't correspond to any actual movement in the suite. Shadows would shift across the reflected walls, and she could swear she saw furniture arrangements that didn't match the suite's actual layout. "Mrs. Whitfield, can you show me exactly what you're seeing?" Patricia asked when the guest returned to her suite. Mrs. Whitfield approached the mirror hesitantly. "Watch carefully," she said, positioning herself directly in front of the glass. "At first it looks normal, but then..." As Patricia watched, Mrs. Whitfield's reflection began to change in subtle but unmistakable ways. The reflected figure was wearing different clothing, a formal evening gown instead of the casual day wear Mrs. Whitfield was actually wearing. The reflected room behind her showed a different time period, with furniture styles and decor that appeared to be from several decades earlier. Most disturbing of all, other figures began to appear in the reflection. Patricia could see an elderly man in a tuxedo standing behind Mrs. Whitfield's reflected image, and a younger woman in 1950s-style clothing sitting in a chair that didn't exist in the actual suite. The reflected figures moved independently, having conversations that Patricia couldn't hear, and occasionally they would look directly out of the mirror as if they were aware of being observed. "Do you recognize these people?" Patricia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Whitfield nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "The man is my late husband, Charles. He died 3 years ago. The woman is my sister, Margaret, who passed away in 1987. But Patricia, they look exactly as they did when we all took our first cruise together in 1952, aboard the Queen Elizabeth." Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard stories from other cruise ship workers about mirrors that showed impossible reflections, but she had always dismissed them as superstition or imagination. Now, witnessing the phenomenon firsthand, she realized that some objects aboard ships could serve as windows into times and places that should no longer exist. Over the next several days, Patricia documented the mirror's behavior, taking photographs and notes about what different people saw when they looked into it. The results were both fascinating and terrifying. Each person who looked into the mirror saw different scenes, but they all shared common elements. The reflections showed people from the observer's past, often deceased relatives or friends. And the settings were always related to previous cruise experiences or significant maritime memories. A young couple from Germany saw their grandparents, who had died in World War II, standing on the deck of a ship that had been sunk during the war. A businessman from New York saw his father, who had worked as a merchant marine, standing in the engine room of a vessel that had been scrapped decades earlier. Most disturbing of all, a family with young children saw relatives who had died in the Titanic disaster, standing in what appeared to be the ship's grand ballroom just before the collision. Patricia contacted the ship's senior staff, including Captain Morrison and Hotel Director Stevens, to report the unusual situation. Initially skeptical, they became believers when they witnessed the mirror's behavior firsthand. Captain Morrison saw his own father, who had been lost at sea during a storm in 1978, standing on the bridge of a ship that Morrison recognized as his father's final command. "This is impossible," Captain Morrison said, backing away from the mirror. "But I can see him as clearly as I can see you. He's trying to tell me something, but I can't hear what he's saying." The ship's historian, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, was consulted about the mirror's origins. Her research revealed that the mirror had been salvaged from the Oceanic Star, a luxury liner that had operated transatlantic crossings from 1948 to 1962. The Oceanic Star had been famous for its elegant accommodations and had carried thousands of passengers on memorable voyages before being retired and partially scrapped. Mirrors have always held special significance in maritime folklore, Dr. Martinez explained. Sailors believed that mirrors could capture and hold the souls of those who looked into them, especially during times of strong emotion or significant life events. If this mirror was present during decades of cruise experiences, it may have absorbed the memories and emotions of countless passengers. But the mirror's behavior became increasingly disturbing as the cruise continued. Passengers began reporting that the reflected figures were trying to communicate with them, gesturing urgently and appearing to mouth warnings or messages. Some guests claimed they could faintly hear voices coming from the mirror, speaking in languages they didn't recognize or discussing events that had happened decades earlier. The situation reached a crisis point when Mrs. Whitfield reported that her deceased husband's reflection was showing her scenes of a ship in distress. In the mirror, she could see passengers in life jackets, crew members running through corridors, and water flooding into lower decks. The reflected Charles was pointing frantically at something outside the mirror's view, as if trying to warn her of impending danger. That night, the Emerald Seas encountered a severe storm that hadn't been predicted by weather services. The ship was battered by waves exceeding 30 feet, and several passengers were injured when furniture broke loose in the public areas. But the crew's response was unusually well coordinated, as if they had been prepared for the emergency in advance. Later investigation revealed that several crew members had received warnings about the storm from passengers who had seen the information reflected in the mirror in Suite 1205. The reflected figures had apparently been trying to communicate vital safety information, drawing on their experiences from maritime disasters of the past to help prevent a tragedy in the present. Following the storm incident, the cruise line's corporate headquarters ordered the mirror to be removed from Suite 1205. But when the maintenance crew arrived to take it down, they found that the mirror had cracked from corner to corner, creating a spiderweb pattern that made it impossible to see any reflections at all. The broken mirror was carefully packaged and stored in the ship's hold, but crew members reported strange sounds coming from the storage area. Voices speaking in multiple languages, the sound of breaking glass, and occasionally what sounded like people calling for help. The mirror was eventually transferred to a maritime museum, where it remains on display with a placard describing it as a mirror from the golden age of ocean travel. Patricia completed her contract aboard the Emerald Seas, but requested assignment to newer vessels that didn't use salvage materials from older ships. She now works for a cruise line that operates exclusively modern vessels. But she's never forgotten the faces she saw in that mirror, or the desperate way they tried to communicate across the barrier between past and present. Suite 1205 was refurbished with a new mirror, but guests occasionally report seeing brief glimpses of figures that shouldn't be there. The housekeeping staff has learned to avoid looking too closely into any of the mirrors during their cleaning routines, especially in the early morning hours when the ship is quiet and the boundary between reflection and reality seems thinnest. The Emerald Seas continues to operate luxury cruises, but the story of the mirror in Suite 1205 has become part of the ship's unofficial folklore. Passengers sometimes request that specific suite, hoping to catch a glimpse of their own departed loved ones, while others specifically avoid it, preferring not to confront the possibility that some reflections show not what is, but what was, and what continues to exist in the spaces between memory and glass, where the past refuses to stay buried beneath the waves. Because some mirrors, it seems, are more than simple reflections. They are windows into the accumulated experiences of everyone who has ever looked into them, preserving moments of joy and sorrow, love and loss in silvered glass that remembers everything and forgets nothing, especially the faces of those who have sailed into the horizon and never returned. Our eighth story takes us to the entertainment heart of every cruise ship, where thousands gather each night to escape reality through music, dance, and theatrical magic. But sometimes, the most captivating performances are the ones that were never meant to be seen by the living. Cameron Rodriguez was 26 years old and working as an entertainment crew member aboard the Symphony of the Seas, one of the largest cruise ships in the world. With a background in theater production and stage management, Cameron was responsible for setting up and maintaining the ship's main theater, a spectacular venue that could accommodate 1,400 guests and featured state-of-the-art lighting, sound, and stage equipment. His duties included preparing the theater for daily shows, coordinating with performers, and ensuring all technical systems operated flawlessly. The Symphony of the Seas featured multiple entertainment venues, but the Crown Theater on Deck 6 was the ship's crown jewel. The theater hosted everything from Broadway-style musicals to comedy shows, magic acts, and guest lectures. Cameron took immense pride in his work, knowing that the quality of his technical preparations directly impacted the experience of thousands of passengers throughout each cruise. Cameron's typical routine involved arriving at the theater at 4 a.m. to begin setup for the day's rehearsals and evening performances. The early morning hours were peaceful, allowing him to work methodically through his checklist without the distractions of passenger foot traffic or performer rehearsals. He would test lighting systems, check sound equipment, inspect stage rigging, and ensure that every technical element was ready for the day's activities. It was during a 14-day transatlantic crossing that Cameron first heard the performance that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He had arrived at the theater at his usual 4 a.m. start time and was working on the lighting board when he heard the unmistakable sounds of a full musical production coming from the stage area. The sounds were rich and detailed, a full orchestra playing what sounded like a classic Broadway overture, accompanied by the voices of a large ensemble cast. Cameron could hear individual instruments clearly. Violins, trumpets, drums, and piano, all perfectly coordinated in a complex musical arrangement. The vocals were equally impressive, with multiple harmony parts and solo voices that demonstrated professional-level talent. Cameron's first thought was that someone had accidentally left the sound system playing a recording from a previous show. But as he listened more carefully, he realized that what he was hearing was a live performance, not a recording. The music had the subtle variations, the breathing patterns, and the small imperfections that characterized live musical theater. Cameron made his way from the lighting booth toward the stage, following the sound of the performance. As he got closer, the music became even more detailed and immersive. He could hear the rustle of costumes, the tap of dance shoes on the stage floor, and even the quiet instructions being whispered between performers during brief musical interludes. When Cameron reached the edge of the stage area, he found himself looking out over the theater's main floor. The house lights were off, but the stage was brilliantly illuminated with a lighting design that Cameron didn't recognize. The stage was filled with performers in elaborate period costumes, men in tuxedos and women in elegant gowns that appeared to be from the 1970s. But as Cameron watched in growing amazement, he realized that he could see through the performers. They were translucent, like projections or holograms, but they moved with the natural fluidity of living people. The orchestra pit was filled with musicians playing instruments that Cameron could see, but that seemed to exist in a different dimension from the physical theater. The performance was a full-scale musical production, complete with choreographed dance numbers, elaborate set pieces that materialized and disappeared as needed, and costume changes that happened in full view of the audience. But there was no audience. The theater's 1,400 seats were completely empty. Yet the performers played to the house as if it were filled with enthusiastic spectators. Cameron stood transfixed as the performance continued. The music was hauntingly beautiful, with melodies that seemed familiar yet impossible to identify. The performers sang with passion and skill that rivaled any professional production Cameron had ever seen, and their choreography was complex and perfectly synchronized. But what made the experience truly unsettling was the realization that the performers seemed to be aware of his presence. Several of the dancers looked directly at him during their routines, and one of the lead singers appeared to be performing specifically for him, making eye contact and gesturing in his direction during an emotional ballad. Cameron tried to document what he was seeing, pulling out his phone to record the performance. But when he looked at the phone's screen, it showed only the empty, darkened theater. The camera seemed unable to capture the supernatural performance, recording only silence and darkness, where Cameron could clearly see and hear a full musical production. The performance continued for nearly 2 hours, featuring multiple acts, costume changes, and elaborate musical numbers. Cameron found himself completely absorbed in the show, forgetting his morning setup routine as he watched what was undoubtedly the most spectacular theatrical performance he had ever witnessed. As the performance reached its climax, the lead performers took center stage for what appeared to be the show's finale. The music swelled to a crescendo, and the entire cast joined in a powerful ensemble number that filled the theater with sound so rich and complex that Cameron could feel it resonating in his chest. But as the final notes faded, something changed in the atmosphere of the theater. The performers' expressions shifted from joy to sadness, and their movements became slower, more deliberate. The lighting began to dim, and Cameron could see that the performers were looking directly at him with expressions of longing and regret. The lead singer, a woman in an elegant silver gown, stepped forward and appeared to speak directly to Cameron, though he couldn't hear her words over the fading music. She gestured toward the empty audience seats, then placed her hand over her heart in a gesture that seemed to convey both gratitude and sorrow. As the last of the stage lights faded, the performers began to disappear, fading away like morning mist until Cameron found himself standing alone in the dark, empty theater. The silence was so complete that he could hear his own heartbeat and the distant hum of the ship's engines. Cameron immediately contacted his supervisor, entertainment director Lisa Park, to report what he had experienced. Director Park was initially skeptical, but she became concerned when Cameron showed her that several pieces of stage equipment had been moved during the night, arranged in configurations that would have been appropriate for a large-scale musical production. These rigging points were set for a completely different show layout, Director Park observed, examining the stage setup. Someone would have needed hours to make these changes, and they would have needed expert knowledge of our equipment systems. A review of the theater's security cameras revealed something that made the situation even more mysterious. The cameras showed Cameron entering the theater at 4 a.m. and standing motionless in various locations for nearly 2 hours, apparently watching and listening to something that wasn't visible to the recording equipment. But the cameras also showed that the stage equipment had indeed been moved and reconfigured during the night, despite the fact that no one else had entered the theater. Director Park contacted the ship's historian, Dr. Deist, Amanda Foster, to research the theater's background. Dr. Foster's investigation revealed that the Crown Theater had been built using materials and design elements from the Golden Star, a cruise ship that had operated from 1948 to 1962, 1972 to 1979. The Golden Star had been famous for its elaborate entertainment programs and had featured some of the most spectacular musical productions ever staged at sea. The research revealed a tragic connection to Cameron's experience. In 1978, the Golden Star's entertainment cast and orchestra had been performing their signature musical revue when the ship encountered a severe storm in the North Atlantic. The performance had continued even as the ship struggled with massive waves and high winds. With the cast and crew determined to maintain passenger morale during the frightening weather. But the storm had proven more severe than anticipated. The Golden Star had suffered catastrophic structural damage and had begun taking on water during the final act of the musical. The entertainment staff had continued performing even as emergency procedures were initiated, helping to keep passengers calm during the evacuation process. Tragically, several members of the cast and orchestra had been lost when a section of the ship's superstructure collapsed during the evacuation. The performance Cameron witnessed matches historical descriptions of the Golden Star's final show, Dr. Foster explained. The costumes, the musical arrangements, even the staging, everything corresponds to accounts from survivors of that night. The discovery explained why the performers had seemed to be playing to an empty house with such dedication and emotion. They were continuing the performance that had been interrupted by tragedy, playing for an audience that existed only in their memory, driven by the same commitment to their craft that had characterized their final, heroic performance aboard the Golden Star. Cameron requested a transfer to day shift duties, citing scheduling conflicts with his morning routine. He never again worked alone in the Crown Theater during the early morning hours. But other crew members began reporting similar experiences. The theater's technical staff learned to expect equipment changes during certain nights, particularly when the ship was crossing the same waters where the Golden Star had met its fate. The Symphony of the Seas continues to host spectacular entertainment programs in the Crown Theater. But the technical crew has developed an unspoken understanding about the theater's supernatural residents. Equipment that is moved during the night is left in its new configuration if it doesn't interfere with scheduled performances. And crew members have learned to appreciate the ghostly performances as a tribute to the dedication of entertainers who gave everything for their art. Cameron now works as a technical director for a theater company in Denver, safely anchored on solid ground where the only performances are those scheduled by living directors for living audiences. But he's never forgotten the beauty and sadness of that final performance, or the way the lead singer had looked at him with eyes that held both the joy of artistic expression and the sorrow of a show that could never truly end. The Crown Theater of the Symphony of the Seas remains one of the most popular entertainment venues at sea. But experienced crew members know that some performances transcend the boundaries between life and death, continuing to play for audiences that exist in the space between memory and eternity, where the show must always go on, regardless of the cost to those who have dedicated their lives to bringing joy and wonder to others through the magic of live performance. Because some artists, it seems, are so committed to their craft that not even death can bring down the final curtain. And some theaters hold echoes of performances that were so powerful, so meaningful, that they continue to resonate across decades, reminding us that true art is eternal, and that the most important shows are often those that play for audiences we cannot see in theaters that exist beyond the boundaries of the physical world. Our ninth story takes us deep into the bowels of these floating cities, to the industrial spaces where the ship's essential operations continue around the clock, hidden from passenger view. But in these forgotten corners, where steam rises and machines never stop, some visitors from the depths refuse to stay submerged. Miguel Santos was 33 years old and had been working in cruise ship laundry operations for 9 years. His expertise in managing the massive industrial washing and drying systems that kept thousands of linens, towels, and uniforms clean daily had made him an invaluable member of the crew aboard the Caribbean Dream. Miguel was responsible for the night shift operations in the ship's main laundry facility, located on Deck 2, well below the passenger areas and hidden from the glamorous world above. The laundry facility aboard the Caribbean Dream was a sprawling industrial operation that ran 24 hours a day. The night shift, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., was typically the busiest time, as Miguel and his small team processed the day's accumulation of linens from restaurants, housekeeping, and crew quarters. The work was hot, humid, and physically demanding, but Miguel took pride in ensuring that passengers woke each morning to fresh, clean linens and towels. Miguel's routine was methodical and efficient. He would begin each shift by checking the industrial washers and dryers, some of which were large enough to process hundreds of pounds of laundry at once. The machines ran in carefully timed cycles throughout the night, and Miguel had developed an instinct for their rhythms and sounds, able to detect even minor mechanical issues before they became serious problems. It was during a routine Caribbean cruise that Miguel first encountered the visitor, who would forever change his relationship with the ship's deepest spaces. The incident began on a Tuesday night when Miguel was working alone, his usual partner having called in sick with food poisoning. The laundry room was filled with a constant hum of machinery, the hiss of steam, and the rhythmic tumbling of clothes and linens in the massive industrial washers. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Miguel was transferring a load of kitchen linens from a washer to a dryer when he noticed something that made him pause. Mixed in with the white kitchen towels and aprons were several items that didn't belong. Pieces of clothing that were dark, waterlogged, and covered in what appeared to be seaweed and barnacles. Miguel pulled the strange items from the load, examining them under the harsh fluorescent lights of the laundry room. The clothing appeared to be from a different era, a man's work shirt with buttons and stitching that looked decades old, pants made from heavy canvas material, and what appeared to be pieces of a life jacket that had been torn and damaged by prolonged exposure to salt water. How did these get in here? Miguel muttered to himself, checking the washer's loading area for any sign of how the items had been introduced. The industrial washers were loaded through secure hatches, and Miguel was certain he hadn't put these waterlogged clothes into the machine. Miguel set the strange items aside and continued with his routine. But 20 minutes later, he discovered more of the mysterious clothing in a different washer. This time, the items included what appeared to be a ship's uniform, a jacket with tarnished brass buttons and fabric patches that bore the name of a vessel Miguel didn't recognize: the Atlantic Pioneer. As the night progressed, Miguel found more waterlogged clothing appearing in machine after machine. Each load contained items that seemed to have been submerged in seawater for years, and many bore the names or insignia of ships that Miguel had never heard of. The clothing was always mixed in with regular laundry loads, as if it had been added to the machines by someone with access to the laundry facility. At 3:45 a.m., Miguel was checking a load of crew uniforms when he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of water dripping steadily onto the concrete floor of the laundry room. Miguel followed the sound to its source and found a trail of seawater leading from one of the industrial washers to a corner of the room where spare equipment was stored. The trail was fresh, with puddles of salt water that reflected the overhead lights. But what made the discovery truly unsettling was that the water appeared to be moving, flowing in a steady stream as if someone were walking through the laundry room, leaving wet footprints with each step. Miguel grabbed a flashlight and followed the water trail, his heart pounding as he realized that the footprints were leading him deeper into the laundry facility, toward the storage areas where clean linens were kept before distribution. The trail led through several rooms, past rows of industrial shelving and storage containers, before ending at a section of the ship that Miguel rarely visited. In the furthest corner of the laundry facility, Miguel found something that defied all explanation. Standing among the storage shelves was a figure that appeared to be a man in his 40s, wearing the waterlogged clothing that Miguel had been finding in the washing machines. The figure was translucent, like a projection, but Miguel could see him clearly in the beam of his flashlight. The man was soaking wet, with seawater dripping constantly from his clothes and hair. His skin had the pale, waterlogged appearance of someone who had been submerged for a long time, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had experienced unimaginable terror. But what made the encounter truly horrifying was that the figure seemed to be aware of Miguel's presence. "Please," the figure said, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "Help me get clean. I've been trying to wash these clothes for so long, but they never come clean." Miguel backed away slowly, his flashlight beam trembling as he tried to process what he was seeing. The figure reached toward one of the storage shelves and pulled out a bundle of the same waterlogged clothing that Miguel had been finding in the machines. "I keep trying," the figure continued, his voice filled with desperation. "But the salt water won't come out. The seaweed won't come off. I need to be clean before I can go home." Miguel realized that he was looking at the ghost of someone who had drowned at sea, someone whose spirit was trapped in an endless cycle of trying to cleanse himself of the ocean that had claimed his life. The waterlogged clothing in the washing machines wasn't random debris. It was this spirit's desperate attempt to use the ship's laundry facilities to wash away the evidence of his death. "Who are you?" Miguel managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas Mitchell," the figure replied. "Chief engineer, Atlantic Pioneer. We went down in a storm in 1987. I was in the engine room when the water came in. I tried to save the ship, but..." His voice trailed off, and he looked down at his waterlogged clothes with infinite sadness. Miguel's radio crackled to life, startling him. "Laundry, this is security. We're getting reports of water damage on deck 2. Are you having any equipment malfunctions down there?" Miguel looked around and realized that the entire laundry room was now flooded with several inches of seawater. The water was flowing from the area where Thomas Mitchell's spirit stood, spreading throughout the facility and threatening the electrical systems that powered the industrial equipment. "Security, I need you to come to the laundry facility immediately." Miguel radioed back. "We have a serious situation down here." But when security officers Martinez and Kim arrived, they found Miguel standing alone in a laundry room that was completely dry. There was no sign of flooding, no waterlogged clothing, and no evidence of the supernatural encounter Miguel described. However, the officers did find something that supported Miguel's account. Several of the industrial washers contained loads of clothing that were completely saturated with salt water, despite having gone through full wash and rinse cycles. These clothes are soaked with seawater, Officer Martinez observed, examining the items. But our water system is completely fresh water. There's no way salt water could get into these machines through normal operations. The ship's maintenance chief, Carlos Ruiz, was called to examine the laundry equipment. His investigation revealed that the machines were functioning normally, with no mechanical problems that could explain the presence of salt water in the wash loads. But when he tested the water in the affected machines, he found not only salt content, but also traces of marine organisms, microscopic sea life that could only have come from deep ocean water. Miguel requested an immediate transfer to day shift operations, citing health concerns related to night shift work. His request was approved without question, as the ship's management had received similar requests from other crew members who worked in the lower decks during night hours. The laundry facility was blessed by the ship's chaplain and equipped with additional drainage systems to handle any future equipment malfunctions. But night shift workers continued to report finding waterlogged clothing in the machines, and the facility's water usage during night hours remained mysteriously high, as if someone were continuously running wash cycles. Miguel now works for a hotel laundry service in Miami, processing linens and towels for guests who sleep safely on solid ground. But he's never forgotten the desperate sadness in Thomas Mitchell's eyes, or the way the drowned engineer had pleaded for help in washing away the ocean that had claimed his life and his ship. The Caribbean Dream continues to operate regular Caribbean cruises, and the laundry facility continues to process thousands of pounds of linens daily. But the night shift staff now works in pairs, and they've learned to expect occasional loads of clothing that smell of seawater and carry the weight of tragedies that occurred decades ago in waters far from any cruise route. Because some stains, it seems, can never be washed away. And some spirits are doomed to endless cycles of trying to cleanse themselves of deaths that occurred in the depths of the ocean, where the pressure of water and the weight of sorrow combine to create burdens that no amount of soap and hot water can ever remove. The laundry room of the Caribbean Dream processes more than just the daily accumulation of linens and towels. It also handles the impossible task of trying to wash clean the clothes of those who died at sea, carrying their desperate hope that somewhere, in the rhythm of industrial washers and the heat of commercial dryers, they might finally find the cleanliness that will allow them to rest in peace. Our 10th story takes us to the ship's medical facility, where trained professionals work around the clock to handle everything from seasickness to serious emergencies. But sometimes, the patients who arrive at the medical bay bring with them conditions that no medical training can prepare you for. Dr. Rachel Morrison was 27 years old and working her second contract as a ship's nurse aboard the Oceanic Splendor, a large cruise vessel operating 7-day Eastern Caribbean routes. With 5 years of emergency room experience at a major hospital in Atlanta, Rachel was well equipped to handle the medical challenges that arose during cruise operations. From minor injuries and seasickness to cardiac events and surgical emergencies that required coordination with Coast Guard medical evacuation services. The medical bay aboard the Oceanic Splendor was a fully equipped facility located on Deck 3, featuring examination rooms, a small surgical suite, isolation quarters, and all the equipment necessary to handle serious medical emergencies until patients could be transferred to shore-based hospitals. Rachel worked the night shift, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., providing medical coverage during the hours when the ship's primary medical staff was off duty. Rachel's typical night shift was relatively quiet, handling occasional cases of seasickness, minor injuries from passengers who had consumed too much alcohol, and routine medication requests from guests with chronic conditions. The work was manageable and gave her valuable experience in maritime medicine, which she planned to use toward a career in emergency medical services. It was during the ship's fourth night at sea, while sailing between St. Thomas and Barbados, that Rachel encountered a patient who would challenge everything she thought she knew about life, death, and the practice of medicine. At 2:47 a.m., Rachel received an emergency call from ship security requesting immediate medical assistance for an unconscious passenger found on the port side promenade deck. Medical to deck 7, port side, came the radio call from Security Officer Davis. We have an unresponsive adult male, appears to be in his 50s. Passenger found him collapsed near the railing. Rachel grabbed her emergency medical kit and rushed to the location, where she found security officers Davis and Thompson standing over a man who appeared to be unconscious. The patient was lying on his back, wearing casual cruise attire, khaki pants, a polo shirt, and deck shoes. He appeared to be breathing, but his skin had an unusual pallor that immediately concerned Rachel. "How long has he been like this?" Rachel asked as she knelt beside the patient and began her initial assessment. Passenger who found him said maybe 5 minutes, Officer Davis replied. She was taking a late-night walk and saw him collapse. No obvious signs of trauma or injury. Rachel checked the patient's vital signs and found something that made no medical sense. The man had no detectable pulse, either at his wrist or at his carotid artery in his neck. His skin was cold to the touch, and his breathing was so shallow that it was barely perceptible. By all standard medical indicators, the patient should have been dead, yet he was clearly alive and occasionally moved his lips as if trying to speak. "We need to get him to the medical bay immediately," Rachel instructed. "Help me get him on the stretcher." As they moved the patient to the medical facility, Rachel continued monitoring his condition. His vital signs remained impossible. No pulse, extremely low body temperature, and breathing so minimal that it wouldn't have sustained life in a normal person. Yet the patient occasionally opened his eyes and seemed to be trying to communicate. Once in the medical bay, Rachel connected the patient to the facility's monitoring equipment, hoping to get more accurate readings of his condition. The results were even more disturbing than her manual assessment. The cardiac monitors showed a completely flat line, no heart activity whatsoever. The pulse oximeter couldn't detect any blood oxygen levels. The blood pressure cuff registered 0/0. According to every piece of medical equipment in the facility, the patient was clinically dead. Yet he continued to breathe, move his eyes, and occasionally attempt to speak. "Sir, can you hear me?" Rachel asked, leaning close to the patient. "Can you tell me your name?" The patient's eyes opened, and he looked directly at Rachel with an expression of profound sadness and confusion. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible, like someone speaking from a great distance. I don't understand," he whispered. "I was swimming. The water was so cold. I couldn't reach the surface." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "What's your name, sir? What room are you staying in?" "David. David Chen," the patient replied, his voice growing slightly stronger. "Room 8042. But I don't understand how I got here. I was in the water. I couldn't breathe. Everything went dark. Rachel immediately contacted the ship's guest services to verify the patient's information. The response she received made the situation even more mysterious. According to the passenger manifest, David Chen was indeed registered in room 8042, but he had been reported missing by his wife 3 hours earlier when he failed to return to their stateroom after going for a late-night swim in the ship's pool. Mrs. Chen reported that her husband went to the pool area around 11:30 p.m. The guest services representative explained. When he didn't return by 1 a.m., she went looking for him. Security found his towel and room key by the pool, but no sign of Mr. Chen. We've been conducting a search of the ship. Rachel looked down at the patient on the examination table. David Chen was lying there, apparently alive but displaying no vital signs, describing an experience of drowning while somehow being present in the medical bay. The situation defied all medical logic and challenged Rachel's understanding of what was possible. "Mr. Chen, you're in the ship's medical bay," Rachel explained gently. "You weren't found in the water. Security found you collapsed on the promenade deck. Do you remember how you got there?" David's expression grew more confused and distressed. "No, I was swimming. The pool was so deep, deeper than it should have been. I kept trying to reach the surface, but I couldn't. The water was so cold, and it tasted like the ocean." Rachel contacted Dr. Patricia Williams, the ship's chief medical officer, requesting immediate assistance with an unusual case. When Dr. Williams arrived and reviewed David's condition, she was as baffled as Rachel. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Williams admitted after conducting her own examination. "By every medical standard, this patient should be dead. No pulse, no blood pressure, body temperature of 89 degrees. Yet he's conscious, responsive, and able to communicate coherently." As they discussed the case, David continued to describe his experience in the water. His account became increasingly detailed and disturbing. He described sinking deeper and deeper into water that seemed to have no bottom, surrounded by other swimmers who were also struggling to reach the surface. He spoke of seeing the lights of the ship far above him, growing dimmer as he sank, and of feeling his lungs fill with water as he lost consciousness. "But the strangest thing," David said, his voice growing stronger, "was that I wasn't alone down there. There were others, people who had been swimming in that pool for years, decades maybe. They tried to help me, tried to show me the way back to the surface, but the current was too strong." Dr. Williams decided to contact the ship's historian, Dr. Margaret Foster, to research the pool area's history. Dr. Foster's investigation revealed information that made David's experience even more unsettling. The Oceanic Splendor's main pool had been built using materials and design elements from the Pacific Star, a cruise ship that had operated from 1978 to 1995. The Pacific Star had been the site of multiple drowning incidents over its operational lifetime, including several cases where experienced swimmers had mysteriously drowned in the ship's pools despite the presence of lifeguards and safety equipment. The incidents had never been fully explained, and the ship had eventually been retired, partly due to safety concerns. It's possible that the pool area retains some kind of memory of these past incidents, Dr. Foster suggested. In maritime folklore, water is believed to hold the strongest connections to traumatic events. As the night progressed, David's condition began to change. His body temperature slowly started to rise, and the monitoring equipment began to detect faint signs of cardiac activity. It was as if he were gradually returning to life, transitioning from whatever state he had been in back to normal human physiology. By 5 a.m., David's vital signs had stabilized to nearly normal levels, though he remained weak and confused about his experience. He had no memory of being found on the promenade deck and insisted that he had been drowning in the pool until just moments before waking up in the medical bay. Mrs. Chen was contacted and arrived at the medical bay in tears, having spent hours believing her husband was lost overboard. The reunion was emotional, but David's account of his experience left both his wife and the medical staff deeply unsettled. "I've been swimming my whole life," David told his wife. "I was on my college swim team. But that pool, there was something wrong with it. It was like it was connected to something deeper, something that didn't want to let me go." David was kept under observation for the remainder of the cruise and underwent extensive medical testing when the ship returned to port. All tests came back normal, with no indication of any medical condition that could explain his experience or his temporary lack of vital signs. Rachel completed her contract aboard the Oceanic Splendor, but requested assignment to land-based medical facilities for her next position. She now works in an emergency room in Phoenix, Arizona, where the patients she treats have conditions that can be diagnosed and treated using conventional medical knowledge. The Oceanic Splendor continues to operate Caribbean cruises, and the pool area remains open to passengers during regular hours. But the medical staff has developed protocols for handling cases of unexplained submersion syndrome, and lifeguards have been instructed to pay special attention to swimmers who appear to be struggling in ways that don't match the pool's actual depth. David Chen never swam in a cruise ship pool again, but he occasionally receives letters from other passengers who have had similar experiences. People who describe sinking into pools that seemed infinitely deep, surrounded by other swimmers who had been trapped in those waters for years, all trying to find their way back to the surface and the world of the living. Because some pools, it seems, are deeper than their physical dimensions suggest, connected to waters that exist in the spaces between life and death, where those who have drowned continue to swim in eternal search of the surface they will never reach, occasionally pulling the living down with them into depths that no amount of medical training can explain or treat. The medical bay of the Oceanic Splendor now keeps special equipment for monitoring patients with impossible vital signs, and the staff has learned that some conditions exist beyond the boundaries of medical science. In the realm where water remembers every life it has claimed, and sometimes offers those lives a chance to return, if only temporarily, to the world they left behind beneath the waves.